Welcome to Three Devs and a Maybe, the podcast series for beginner web developers and general web enthusiasts. Now, introducing your show hosts, Michael Budd, Fraser Hart, Lewis Caines, and Ed Mann.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Three Devs and a Maybe. My name's Ed Mann, and today we are again joined by Joe Watkins. How you doing, Joe?
Hi everyone.
How's things going, man? Are you interesting life in the Isle of Wight at the moment?
Oh, that's all right. The sun's come out a little bit.
That's true, yeah. It's been a crazy Easter holidays, hasn't it? Where I don't know about in the Isle of Wight, but where I'm at, it's like weather is kind of like it goes from 5 minutes of absolute sun to then the darkest, like hell is coming over. Yeah,
it's pretty funny. It was really windy, right? And on the news, all over the country, the BBC News was reporting that on the Isle of Wight at the Needles, the wind got up to 105 miles an hour.
Wow.
And but the Needles, right, are just 3 lumps of chalk sticking up out of the sea. I mean, it's always windy there. It's the middle of the sea. And all these news reporters are saying it like there's people trying to cope with it. I mean, they're not big enough to stand on. One of them's got like a lighthouse on it, but I don't think it's used anymore. It's just there for sort of show, you know.
So it's been fine where you are in the Isle of Wight. It's been fine then.
Yeah, I mean, it was windy, but not like blow you away windy.
Well, it means just more time to sit around on the computer, though, doesn't it? You know, you can't get out, so you might as well, stay on the computer. So, I mean, speaking about that, so what have you been up to then? What have you been up to the last couple of weeks?
Oh well, I typed properties RFC.
I was going to mention that, actually. Yeah, I've got it for the show notes, and I'm just wondering, like, you and Phil have been working on that. I know that a couple of weeks ago, you sent it to me, like, the idea and everything, and I thought, this is awesome. This is like, this is the natural progression up from what we already have in PHP 7, was to add this in. So I don't know, for the audience, maybe you don't mind going over, like, what's actually going to be included and things like that.
Well, so yeah, we've got parameter types and return types. So yeah, the logical thing seems to be instance properties. So yeah, you should be able to type instance properties like you can return types. So any of the scalar types or complex types, and inheritance works the same kind of way, so that LSPs are still respected when you're during inheritance. And yeah, this is valuable mostly for objects, because most of our objects now are basically a list of other objects, because of the popularity of things like dependency injection and service location, and that we're very, very object heavy, and because of that we need to write setters and getters, because they're the only way to enforce the type, because we've got parameter and return types. So
yeah, the property itself on the instance can't be validated. It has to be done on the methods themselves.
It has to be done via execution of a method, which is not free. I mean, that costs to enter into, especially like for a method with like one instruction, like return this property or whatever. So that's what you end up doing, whereas it would be better if you could just miss out all that boilerplate and type the property directly.
And I mean, also, it's documentation as well, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Because the amount of PHP docs that is just, this is meant to be this type, now can be actually executable type hints, or type,
Yeah, but, I mean, one of the problems is, if you've ever done like anything seriously like big and like you've extended bits of, like SPL and that, you'll notice that the manual is extremely inaccurate about the prototype of stuff, and you'll go to extend it using the prototype in the manual, and it will complain and say this declaration has to be compatible with that declaration, because the one in the manual is just lying.
Is it just like old documentation then,
no,
and the code's changed over time? Or
no, it's not that. It's when you write user code and you do things like set a default value. We can't do that internally. You can't set a default value. So whenever you've read that a parameter's bool and its default value is true, that isn't so. It will treat it like it is when it actually enters the function, because of the way it passes parameters. But when you reflect on it, and during inheritance, which is all you've got during inheritance, when you reflect on it, you can't have default values. It doesn't know about those.
So is that like an annoying thing in PHP then when dealing with the core, is that you can't do this?
Well, yeah, because it's wrong.
Yeah, because it seems like it's something. I mean, it's available in userland. I don't know why it's not available. Is that like a technical limitation or?
Well, I mean, not limitation. I mean, it's just it's a case of we've already got the parameter passing API, and that already deals with it. And it's always just been you've just been trusted to sort of tell the truth in your documentation. But people have then because the documentation is like such a popular resource. I mean, everybody that writes in PHP has actually read a big section, like large parts of the manual. Yep. That's hardly true about any other language. I mean, people can write in Java for years or C# for years and only ever reference a few pages of the manual, but that's not so for PHP. And so they wanted to have the manual reflect the way the parameters were going to be dealt with in the function. But now that we've got actual typed parameters, things are different, and no one's actually using them types, but it declares in the manual that they are, and we can't actually change the types of the code internally because that will break everyone's stuff. So it's kind of a catch-22.
It's a very tricky situation to be in.
Whatever we do, it's going to annoy one section of people. So yeah, the type properties. It's basically about it is about avoiding boilerplate. I mean, that's one of the nice bits. Mostly, it's about type safety. It's about knowing that when you read a variable, it is this type, and you don't have to do a null check, and you don't have to do instance of, and you don't have to write. And an additional benefit is that you don't have to write getters or setters because you can just say it or get it directly. And that's what it's really about. It's not the getters and setters thing is just one of the. It's a good example. Like in code, people understand that one line is better than one line and then a method declaration.
That's it. Just boilerplate for it, as you say.
Yeah. People get that. But also internally, I mean, in principle, knowing the type of a property allows you to do optimizations. Now, we haven't actually done any because we don't have the equipment. We don't have the mechanisms to do that right now. But it is possible in principle. So that's like a thing to look forward to.
So how has it been? What's the reception been like because when you actually posted it, I'm sure you posted it, like sent it to a couple of people first before you spoke with Phil and stuff. What's their kind of, is it just a thumbs up from everyone?
Well, to be honest, it's quite difficult to understand, and the idea isn't, but the patch is not so easy to understand, and only a few people have actually properly read it and understood it. It's been about neutral, I would say. I mean, some people are super excited about it, and some people think it's the end of the world.
Always that way.
Yeah,
you always get two camps, don't you? You get thumbs up and then thumbs down.
Yeah, it is always that way. There's always some people that think this is the end of PHP as we know it for whatever you're doing, especially when it's about types, because people don't.
Well, this is it, because then they go for the whole dynamic typing argument.
You're not losing anything because all the dynamic typing that was introduced for parameters and return types is exactly the same.
Yeah.
So
this is just the progression on top. That's been approved, that's been allowed, and it makes sense. Like, you can still code in the way you want to. You can still use the language as you want to as a dynamic language, or you can be more strict. And being more strict, it does actually reduce a lot of boilerplate and a lot of errors that come across from coming out of being so dynamic. The intention of, I know I'm getting an integer back, as opposed to, well, it could be anything. I've got a PHP doc that's telling you it could be an integer, but there's nothing actually from the compiler or the interpreter itself that's actually telling me and enforcing that this will be the case.
When I hear people say, "Oh, well, you've got PHP doc to document the types," well, yes, you have, but the engine doesn't care about that.
That's it,
well,
and it's as good as external documentation. I mean, I know it's closer to the code, and people are more likely to change it, and their IDEs are more likely to pick it up and things like that. But it's code. It's comments and treating it as code essentially.
Putting documentation in your code is absolutely fine, but putting code in your documentation is super weird, and it's not a solution at all. It's a workaround.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not like for all of that stuff like annotations and things like that. It's great that it works. I mean, some of them are probably quite clever, but it's not.
Some of them are too clever, I think. When you get into like the Java worlds and things where
that's a lot of problem.
People
don't like magic because they don't understand it, and it's difficult to document and explain and keep documentation updated and explanations updated, and so people don't like that. They don't like magic.
But no, that's awesome though. I mean, I'm glad that, this is kind of happening and things. And actually one of these, when I was thinking about this, you were saying like, to be able to access the property, without the function calls and things, because I guess I've been so accustomed, from the Java world and from really kind of to keep your internals private, how you access this thing, like say a getter and a setter, just to encapsulate, even if it's just boilerplate, that, it's just setting the value, the name of the thing, which we know already exists. But like things like Python, languages like that, they have things like property accessors and modifier type things where, it allows you to say, oh, you've got this property. How do I get this property? Or how do I set this property? I don't know if you're familiar with that concept, like in Python.
It has been RFC'd and it got rejected, property accessors. And setters and getters, because it was really complicated. And
well, the syntax or the implementation?
Implementation.
Right.
And because by necessity, it's complicated, or was complicated, because of this was PHP 5. Now, there's a few things to say about that. First of all, Java doing something like the convention that you always provide a setter and a getter and you hide your implementation details. That's good and everything, but in Java, it's compiled. So it's comparing apples and oranges because a method call's got a real cost that you can actually measure that makes a difference. So in Java, there's not so much of a difference because you're basically executing the same compiled instructions, unless in the case where you're doing some kind of calculation. But then in that case, you're doing work, so you can swallow, in either language, you can swallow the extra cost. But if we're just talking about getters and setters that don't actually...
They're quite opaque, really, of what they do.
Yeah, that's a waste of resources. I mean, PHP's fast. It's the fastest interpreted language because it doesn't have stuff that necessarily wastes resources. So I can't really justify... I can't imagine an implementation I would vote yes on at the moment because I don't see the value in that. I do see the value in obviously I see the value in abstraction, but if it's just a case of this would otherwise be a public property, but in order to enforce some contracts on it, like the type or whatever, the value, I'm going to introduce methods, then that's a waste of resources. And it's a more complicated abstraction. Why shouldn't people just access the property directly? If it would otherwise be public, then why not?
I mean, I suppose how much, then it goes into, you could access, I mean, it also allows you to say, okay, this property is accessible to be set, but you can't read it, or probably actually better the opposite way. You can set this variable, but you can't read this variable, and things like this property and things like those.
But again, that's, then, like I said, I do see the value in abstraction. That's abstracting it. But if we're just talking about values, then it doesn't need to be more complicated than the only thing you're doing with methods is enforcing the type. Then there's no value in that.
No. Especially now with like this type properties, the value now or the type.
Yeah, it will be enforced by other means, and that's better. I do see the value in abstractions and private properties, but there's a cost associated with it, but there's also a value associated with it, so it's okay. But if there's no value associated with it, then...
Yeah, because if it's a dumb DTO that you just want to pass around, there's no point in having getters and setters on that, because as you say, like it's a property, it is treating it almost as an array kind of thing, where you're just chucking it around and you don't really care, as long as it's passing information, it's just a data structure to you.
And another thing to say is obviously it's not just for public properties that it's useful to verify the type. I mean, composition over inheritance, but inheritance exists, and we've got to think about that. So that's an important way to enforce contracts that you would otherwise enforce with methods. So it's got benefits for both of those.
That's good. And is this so? This is currently in the under discussion phase. Is it going well enough to kind of? When do you see it going into voting?
It's going okay. There's a couple of problems with the patch that have been found today, but probably in the next kind of week or so it'll go to voting. But I'm not sure if it's going to pass. I mean, maybe we'll have to do it a different way. I don't know. The alternatives are basically typed Z-vals, which we've already got in a sense, in that a Z-val knows about its type, but it doesn't enforce it. If you pass a parameter into a function and the parameter is hinted as a string, it will verify on the way into the function that it's a string, but if you assign that afterwards with something else, it doesn't care. So typed Z-vals would introduce a way to strictly type a properly strict.
What would be the, because I suppose what would be the advantage there? Would it be that it is then strict throughout?
Yeah, you could have local variables that have got types, and if you know the type information, you can make optimizations. Like if you know something's going to be the Z-val is quite big because it's got the union of all the types that it could be. So if you know that it's only going to be one of those types, then you don't need that union. You can just allocate enough memory for the actual type as it's known in C. So it's really a lot smaller, like 3/4 of the size. 1/4 of the size. So that's a big difference. But yeah, that's one reason you would want all variables to be typed. But the problem is with that is it really complicates everything.
That's what I was thinking. Surely that is a massive change to the engine.
It is a huge change. Nikita said that it probably wouldn't happen before PHP 9, and I agree with that. Because it's not just a case of how are we going to actually do it. We can all think up 10 ways to do it. But how are we going to change all the extensions? How are we going to re-educate everyone about writing extensions? It's going to be basically...
you've just done the change to PHP 7. This is the thing.
It's going to be longer and more drawn out and more complicated than that. Because when you change things that have been the same for years, things were changed for PHP 7, but the fundamentals weren't really. No, the fundamentals were, but the theory wasn't.
Yeah.
Everything's still copy on write and everything's still ref counted, and do you know what I mean? All the theory is the same, but the implementation details are different. But what we're talking about with type Z-vals is not only different implementation details, but different theory, because the things you can do change. Like I just said there, if you get a parameter from a function and it's typed on the way into the function, things change. If you can't automatically accept a Z-val and change its type, that changes an assumption that's been the same for 20 years.
Yeah, that is quite a huge change. And so how does yours work then, your type property implementation? What way do you go about it?
Oh, okay. Well, so objects, and I mean objects, not classes, objects have got a pretty good API in that you can write extension code that can make your objects do really magical things. Now, it can do this because for object instance properties, it generates certain opcodes to do certain things, like if it's reading a property or it's writing to an instance property, rather than using the opcode that assigns normal variables. There's a special opcode because you've got to do it in scope and things like that. So this provides us the opportunity to check the types of variables when certain operations happen on the object, like read and write and fetching a reference and things like that. So that's how it works. It's that simple. But it doesn't work on static properties, and it doesn't work on anything else. It only works on instance. But that's all you really want.
I was thinking that's a win right there.
Yeah, if you can do that without changing how everyone's going to work and changing...
And the performance implications there, like, what are they? Is it very minor?
It depends what you mean. It depends what you mean. There's more instructions to execute. There's no way that they could honestly say there is no impact. Yeah. But if you're not using them...
You're not going to get them. Yeah, you're not going to get any problems.
The only impact you won't really be able. It will be negligible, like actually negligible. You'll be able to measure it, but we're talking numbers that don't matter because you have to check an additional flag. There's an additional branch, but if you're not using type properties, you'll skip the whole lot. So that if you're not using them, then you'll feel it a little bit. But if you are using them, it's difficult to say what you mean by impact, because if we're saying how expensive is it to check the type of a Z-val? Well, it isn't expensive at all. Again, it's instruction, so measurable. But if we're comparing it to
a function call,
which is a method, if we're comparing it to that, then it's far superior.
Yep.
And if we're looking into the future, like I said before, knowing the typing principle allows you to make optimizations that you couldn't otherwise make. So it's not unreasonable to suggest that today there's no performance improvement. There might be a negligible
performance decrease.
Yeah, but in the future, they will almost certainly provide a benefit that would otherwise be impossible. So
that's cool.
Well, not impossible, but more or less impossible.
Because you don't know what it is.
You can infer it, but that only goes so far.
Because then you're working around having to make sure that variable changes, like what it's been used for and stuff. That can only go so far. So actually, interesting with the bench, like kind of that is performance kind of things. I mean, is it when you're doing say like an RFC like this, are you checking like benchmarks? I mean, is there benchmarks? Is it something that you do personally as well as the whole PHP core to make sure that there is?
I wrote the instructions, so I more or less know what it's going to cost, but I haven't benchmarked it yet because I haven't finished the patch yet.
Yep.
That will be done. Also, Intel have got a project where they benchmark some open source projects and then they mail your mailing list. So they benchmark PHP every night or something.
That's cool. That's very nice of them.
Yeah, that is quite nice. And I mean, it costs them. I mean, it's not free. They use like pretty good machines and that. I think they opened a bug report saying that they tried to compile PHP on a machine with 116 cores and it didn't work.
Wow. Okay, that is a very niche market right there.
Yeah, I think that was them, yeah. And then they said they were doing this benchmarking thing. Yeah, so it is part of the sort of workflow, but I mean, we know in theory what it's going to cost. It's just a matter of making the implementation match the theory.
Well, actually, I mean, speaking about opcodes and things like that, it actually brings up it's a good segue into hacking PHP 7, which was a couple of screencasts we did a couple of weeks ago, which I really enjoyed doing. I thought they came, we did 2 parts, and I thought they came out really well.
Yeah, people like them.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's great because I mean, you had a really good accompanying blog post on the topic, and then we did a couple of part 1 of the screencast was going through a hipster PHP language construct edition, and yeah, it was really fun. That went through the whole process of adding a new opcode and things like that. And then in part 2, it was really kind of just, this is a random idea, let's see an implementation. But it really kind of gave, I think, a good overview of different ways and different problems that you may be solving, and you definitely don't want to be solving. You don't want to be thinking, "Oh, this is a good good idea," but the implementation may be somewhat, the bits you're touching definitely, but even some of the implementation specifics may be useful, to people to learn and stuff. So no, it was really interesting doing those, and I really enjoyed going through them.
When you're trying to make when we're doing this podcast, we're just sort of chatting to each other. But when we're doing screencasts, I view it as like an educational material.
That's it. It's such a different, it's gone from a discussion to actually something that people are going to go and sit down and want to learn from, as opposed to
No one wants to watch my screen and watch us babble like we're babbling now. I mean, you can listen to this in your car or whatever, and it's all right. But you wouldn't want to watch a screen with it, would you? It's just not done. So when you're doing a screencast, I view it more like educational material, and it's. You can't just sit there and repeat fact after fact and say, and this is what this is and that's what that is. There's got to be a bit of that so that people can navigate around what they're actually doing. But that's not how you get people to have an interest to learn, because there's no screencast long enough for me to sit here and tell you everything I know. And if I said on the blog post, if all of us got together and wrote a massive book with everything we know about everything in it, no one would ever read it.
No, it's too overwhelming. Or one person would, and that's it, and they probably would,
Yeah, it would be an impossible book to read and understand, and the best way to learn would still be to just have a genuine interest in it. And
I think you need a little bit of theory, and then you need a lot of application. And, you need to do it yourself, and you need to see other people do application, because it's not only the theory behind, these are the places you need to go. It's like how you've tackled that problem, and where you started and what what the end result was.
The problem people make is, the mistake people make, I mean, if I'd be so bold, because I'm a professional at this screencast thing now.
Well, we've knocked it out the park, at least 3 times now.
I think the mistake people make is we could have done them things, and we could have, the first complicated subject, say AST, we could have spent an hour talking about what AST is.
And only in specific, it's a general case and then also specific just to PHP, because, one of the things you said was ASTs are different for every language. So
yeah, it's like a thing. But the thing is, you could spend an hour on that, and that's what people do. That's what people actually do. They'll spend loads and loads of time talking about the details of one thing that it takes seconds to actually just go and look up on the internet, or go to your bookshop and get a book about, or on your Kindle or whatever. If you're really interested in that part of the subject, then study it more. But if you're not, listen to the next thing. And here's what you need to know about it to make it work, and listen to the next thing. And I think that works much better, because in like 45 minutes, that second one, in that 45-minute second screencast, we done like 4 patches.
Yep, and we went through them all and everything.
Yeah, and explained them all, and we chatted about the different details of them and that in 45 minutes. And you can't normally get one patch in like a 2-hour talk when it's like a live coding like session like that was. It's
And I think, I don't know if you're like me, but I have like a very short attention span, and I like, so if I was just hearing this, bit after bit, theory after theory, and I didn't see any application, and I didn't see, in my head, I can think that has been a problem, kind of thing. And like, I want to see, like, tackle a problem, and then when it comes up, I will then realize, it's the AST I need to look at, and then delve into that when I hit that problem, as opposed to, I need to know everything about an AST at the moment, when really you don't. Like, some of the patches we didn't touch it at all. Like, so what's the point in knowing about that? It's not it's not solving the problem I want to solve.
Yeah, and if you're interested in it, like, the source is right there, and there's Wikipedia articles in abundance about every subject that you could possibly mention. So I don't see the point in going into these details, because what happens is you try to explain one thing, and then because you're so deep in the explanation, you've got to use some new term that's probably new, and then you've probably got to explain that term, and then in the explanation of that term, there's probably some new term that you've got to explain,
and
so you just end babbling for an hour about this one thing.
Infinite loop.
Yeah, and that's what tends to happen, and I thought we avoided that really well. I mean, even some internals people said they actually learned stuff when they watched that, which I thought was great, because like, they're actually around internals and watching. But it's not. People don't talk about it, firstly, and the sort of attitude is, whenever anyone asks for like documentation, the attitude is like, sort of go and read the code.
Yeah, which it doesn't help. A beginner who wants kind of the big level concepts. Who wants just that general overview picture to be able to start delving in. So no, I really appreciate it. It was really valuable. To myself to learn this stuff, and from other people, I've heard some really good stuff about, people have said, and it's really nice, and it's great, that that we had the chance to do it. So definitely, again, if you've got the time, we can do some more when we've got ideas and stuff.
Yeah.
One other blog post actually you did recently this month was the picking an approach. And I thought it was a really interesting read actually, because kind of like that polyglot idea and things, where you can we all consider pick the right tool for the job, but as a designer of a language, maybe not thinking that way, and you don't like thinking that way. You don't like thinking, well, what is the scope of this programming language I'm designing, and you shouldn't really have a scope. And you did mention in there, obviously this comes around with the async await type thing. Let's see how this goes, when the async await stuff comes up. And I don't know, have you been looking into that? Are you like invested in kind of bringing that kind of concept to PHP, or?
It's not really a thing I particularly care about. I care about if the implementation is good, and I'll be looking at that. But no, it was just a thing I picked out of a hat, because I know it's going
to be a hot topic.
Yeah, it's going to come up, and people are going to say, this isn't very PHP, but I just don't think that's a valid argument.
Yeah, coroutines and all that stuff. This isn't PHP, go and things like that.
Yeah, I don't think that's a valid argument when people say, we shouldn't turn it into this language, or that's not very PHP, or that's not right. PHP is useful because it's good at whatever people are doing right now, and that's what we want to focus on, even if it's stuff that we don't do, or we don't particularly think PHP is suited for. Let's make it suitable for it, rather than say, oh, it's not suitable for that. Surely that's kind of your function. If you're involved, then that's your function.
Yeah, you're an enabler. You've got to enable this functionality and allow people to do what they want to do with the language. I mean, you know, one thing you said to me, I think it was last episode, I think this was kind of brought up, and I was saying, like, you know, is there a scope to the language kind of feel, you know? And it was like, well, PHP came out of a problem that Rasmus was trying to solve in the mid-90s, and it's still trying to solve those, you know, the problem of the current day today, you know, for the person who's using it today. So why should there be a scope?
We carried some of them problems and we created some problems, but fundamentally we're just trying to be good at what people are doing, and it doesn't matter if we don't personally like it. It just doesn't matter.
As long as it's helping the majority. And I mean, actually speaking about then async await, do you mind like explaining to the audience kind of what that is? Because I mean, you coming from like P threads and things like that, you know, you've got an extensive background and history with PHP and threading and, you know, coroutines and things in PHP.
Yeah, well, okay, so asynchronous code is code where the instructions for individual tasks are interleaved. Now, we can do this already with yield quite...
Yeah, using generators and things like that.
Yeah. Basically, you pass control back from one function to another, and that is what actually interleaves the instructions of the function. So that's what we call asynchronous. Now, await and async are like first-class support for asynchronous functions. At the moment, all of the standard library, all of everything assumes that you will block. So when you go to write asynchronous code, like one of these event loops, like a nice React or whatever, AMP, that was a very good one. You have to yield every few statements, and this is really quite awkward. So that what async does is it gives the Zend first-class support for asynchronous execution, so that it's actually Zend that interleaves the instruction.
And it's doing the hard work, which is where it should be.
Basically, that's what Threads is, but it does it with more than one core. But async await does it on one core, but it does it at the level of the virtual machine, so that it's actually Zend that interleaves the instructions. You don't have to do all this yield business. Now, this is very nice. It is very nice, but we do have yield, and if that comes along, the only thing that I'll be concerned about is it a good implementation? I don't care if I don't particularly think PHP is very good for that, or I think you should do something else, or I don't think them things, but it just doesn't matter if I do. The only thing that actually does matter is what the implementation looks like, and
because you've got to live with this code. I mean, you're going to be using this code for the foreseeable future. If it gets merged in.
So that's what async and await are. And you just mark a function like where you have like public, static, and final. You put async in there, and the engine knows that it can interleave the instructions in that. And
then you would use a wait for when you want to block and say, "Oh, I'm waiting for this to finish before." You know, I mean that's interesting because
you want to resolve the result of the
because resolve, because then you resolve reject it, and that brings in like promises and things like that. So promises and futures, because I know that you actually did an implementation of promises and extension which used P threads.
Yeah.
Would that become like a first-class thing in PHP itself then, with this idea of async and await?
I'm not sure. I mean, that's they're more like high-level patterns that, they could be, but there would not really be anything to gain from that. The thing with async and await is you can't do that in userland. There's no pattern. I mean, you can with yield, but it's
that's what I was thinking. You can use promise and.
But it's a bit awkward today, and the fact is that none of our standard library is prepared to be executed like that, and that's what makes it awkward. But if we have first-class support for that, then there's no excuse. We have to have a standard streams that all work.
Because Hack already supports this, doesn't it?
Yeah. I hate it when Hack's in front of us, but it does.
Well, I mean, that was one of the things that came out with, on day one, wasn't it? This idea of async and await. And have you looked into the code for how it implements that? I mean, is it
No, because that's a very, very different architecture. I don't know about HHVM like I know about Zend. I know about it, but not in the same kind of way. It's got much more at its disposal because of the features of being able to generate code. So how it does it and how we do it are not really going to look similar, I don't think. So yeah, that's HHVM does do it though, yeah, but it won't really look similar. Most of HHVM's not. It's useful for like pushing the search forward, but it's not. You can't like get bits of HHVM and stick it in. No. HB, it won't work.
It's to see if it actually works in practice and being like, oh, we could then maybe use this. This is a great idea, and maybe the actual construct, like the language design, keywords, etc., and things like that. The way it's been designed is good, but not the actual implementation. Yeah, you can't reuse any of the code, but the idea is good, and the experience that people have got who also work on PHP. In implementing those things is also useful, but not the code. So this would still be single threaded, and it wouldn't single. So it wouldn't bring in the idea of what you have in P threads, and it would be what it does like in JavaScript, where you're able to have non-blocking actions, and then you're able to pass coroutines essentially, and passing control back and things like that, back and forth between, and that would then give you concurrency, but it wouldn't give you parallelism, because parallelism you have to do both at the same time.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Which would be really nice. Nicer than yield. If someone can come up with an implementation that's good, then that's great.
I think that's it, isn't it? I mean, you just have to wait and see if someone comes up with an implementation, because it sounds like it's great when people ever say, oh, it'd be great if we had that. Yeah. And people do agree, and they think, oh, it's awesome, because, I mean, you have this in languages like Hack, and you have it in like C#, and you have it now in like ES 2016, you'll have async await in JavaScript. Yeah, I mean, that's been predominantly, though.
This kind of happened with type properties. People always complain that we always say that an RFC's got to come with a patch, because otherwise we're just talking shit. And someone had an RFC up for type properties. But the thing is, and I'm not bashing on them at all, they worked hard on it and it was really well thought about and well written, but they can't write the code and they didn't have an implementation, and some of the stuff they wanted to do is just practically impossible. So that's one of the things it's all very well just to set about writing an RFC, but you have to be able to prove that your idea works, and the proof that your idea works comes only in the form of a patch that is actually...
Well, because that's the limitation, isn't it? Because the limitations are from the engine itself currently. Like, it's great you can think of an idea on paper, but in practice, if it doesn't work, and that's where, you apply it.
In theory, do almost anything, but in practice, you might ruin everything.
Yeah.
So... that's what happened at the start of the type properties RFC. The guy who wrote the other one said, "Oh, can we sort of conform to mine?" And we had to sort of say, "Well, no, sorry, but it's just not possible." And that's why we started a competing RFC, because we couldn't do it the way he wanted to do it. And that's and there's restrictions on stuff, and that's because of the way the engine works. Like, you can't have references to type properties because you can't track the type, obviously, without having type Z-vals.
That's another thing for type Z-vals, isn't it? Yeah, with the referencing.
Yeah. And anyway, it seems like a pain in the arse, because it means you won't be able to like sort on a typed array. But if you've got that kind of object where you need to sort on the array, then firstly you don't type it, and secondly, it's probably abstracted anyway.
Well, you'd hope it is, if you're messing around with a reference of an array, randomly changing it.
And letting the arrays leak, letting references leak from your objects is a sign of bad design. So that it stops it is there for technical reasons, but I can't understand why people will complain when it's obviously a good thing. Someone called it spooky action at a distance. That's what it is. If someone takes your variable by reference and then changes the type and changes the value, and then you go to use it on the very next line, and
you're like, Mwah.
Yeah, and a type error is thrown because they've given an incompatible type. This is extremely strange. So we stopped short of doing that for technical reasons, but really good reasons exist to want it to be like that, but a lot of people don't really agree with me. But I think it's perfectly obvious, but a lot of people don't.
That's life, isn't it? And I'm actually saying that, like, speaking about like the kind of any more PHP stuff you've been doing currently. Have you been working on any other extensions? Doing any other changes, like kind of ideas?
Oh well, no. I just in the last couple of weeks just fixed some bugs in traits and inheritance and things, but not. I'm just working on the type properties thing at the moment, really. But yeah, but there was some pretty horrible bugs and been there since like 5 something to do with traits and interfaces. And
what kind of thing was going on there then?
Oh, it was if you had a class that used traits and interfaces and it implements interfaces, the order of the opcodes meant that the class wasn't built properly and it was verified before it was finished building, because it goes like declare the class, then do the extends bit, and then do the implements bit, and then do the traits, and then bind the traits, and then verify the class. But the classes are also verified when the interfaces are added. So it meant that it wasn't verifying the right thing. So I moved the stuff around so it happens in the right order, and that fixed a couple of horrible bugs that have been outstanding for a while. But it wasn't very complicated, but it took me days to figure out how to do it.
Trying to track down the bug is the hardest part.
I knew exactly where it was. I even posted on the bug report what line they were on. I knew where it was, but when you change something in PHP, you've got to be aware of the 20 years of history behind the line that you're changing.
Yeah, there may be reason why it actually is like this, because someone else has thought.
And it will seem like, oh, that's wrong, but then you'll do it right, and that's also wrong. And so you have to dig and dig and dig, and it took days to come up with the right.
Is there a big comprehensive test suite backed by PHP?
Or it's huge, yeah. There's like over 10,000 tests.
Whoa.
Yeah, there's huge, loads of tests. Yeah.
So that gives you some confidence. I mean, obviously, you need to do it, manually, but it is.
But even though it does, I actually did break Drupal 8.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Do you have to test then against all these different like libraries and things? Do you have like a test suite for that as well?
No, their nightly continuous integration caught it that night. The night I made the commit, and they posted on the GitHub commit saying, "You just broke Drupal 8."
So what was actually broken in Drupal 8 then? What made it change? I
did it wrong. I was passing all the tests, and it was passing tests that I added, but just PHP is really weird, and there's all kinds of edge cases that I hadn't thought about.
So doing all these like frameworks and things, then they pull it in. Obviously, they do tests each, and then you'll be in dialogue with them. Because obviously they're probably the biggest user base. I mean, like WordPress and things like this. If that breaks, it's obviously a big deal, I guess.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, they make noise pretty quickly when we break something. I mean, people don't generally break stuff, but this is not released, obviously. Yeah, people do break stuff, especially me.
Well, you got to break it to fix it. Sometimes,
One time I actually nuked a whole branch of PHP. It was gone.
Oh, that's scary.
Yeah, no, they had to rescue it from Git history.
Oh, no. Oh, dear. Yeah, the tales of Git, and, But the nice thing about Git, though, is you can always redeem yourself. Git reflog, and...
I can't, I just delete the folder and clone it again.
Start again, it's like, I don't care.
Yeah. About every 6 months to a year, I'll learn a new trick with Git, and then...
You'll realise then you're like, okay, I've exploited this trick. I now need to start again.
If I can't fix it with one of the tricks that I've learned, I just have to start again.
Well, if in doubt, you can always put.
You know what it is? I tried to read an ebook about it, right? But when every other line is just filled with characters, I can't read it. Yeah,
it gets too much.
Yeah, and all the commit hashes everywhere. I can't focus on it. And some of the commands are pretty counterintuitive as well.
I think they're trying to.
I think that it's one of the things.
Make it a bit annoying.
You've got to think a particular way, and if you don't think that particular way, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, well, it's like you've got to know. I mean, the tools above it now, like they've made a lot, but like the actual fundamental commands, and things like that, the fundamental like boilerplate, essentially, commands and actions, those haven't changed. It's just the top level where people have, added extra things on. But yeah, you do have to think of like the DAG and all those type of things.
And people have complicated it with their usage as well, with submodules and submodules of submodules.
Oh, submodules are the devil. Yeah. It gets very confusing.
I basically blame Android for that. That's basically their fault. Dependencies are a good thing.
Because, PHP is just one repo, pull down, and that's it. And you've got that everything.
Yeah, and there's like extensions around about and like PHP code round about, but yeah, there's one repo.
You don't have to pull down any submodules, you don't do any of that funky stuff, you just have one repo.
It would be so hard. There is quite a lot of branches, but you've only got to worry about the most recent ones.
That's cool, though, man. It's great talking to you again, catching up and, talking about all the PHP stuff and everything. How's work going? Have you been doing much at work? Anything interesting?
Oh, just plodding along, really. There's been some contributions to uopz from outside. But
brilliant! How's that going? Is it slowly making its way to PHP 7 compatibleness?
Well, yeah, it is, but I still prefer probably removing it from our code base at the moment. But it is stabilising. It's getting a little bit better, but I think there are probably better solutions to these problems.
Yeah, is it something you may have to think about, maybe going back to the drawing board completely and thinking again?
Oh no, I just don't. It would be better just to write code that doesn't need that, and so much better that if we make it work today, and it probably is doable, but there's not much incentive. If we make it work today, in a couple of years' time, it's going to be totally broken again. And a couple of years after that, it's going to be totally broken again. And it's not sustainable. You can find time to write that stuff, and you can find time to document it, and you can find time to maintain it, but you can't find time to do that whole cycle every couple of years. And when you're doing that kind of thing, that's what you're looking at.
Are you hoping now is the time then to essentially rewrite those test suite, like those test cases, or rewrite the code, that actually, is obviously the subject of that is those tests that causes all these problems?
Both really. Rewrite tests that don't need to do that, and where it's forced on them by the code, rewrite the code.
Because maybe the value now is in that, there's a better, more incentive in that, as opposed to having a hack, essentially, to kind of try and fix it.
For the last sort of few months now, we have been slowly getting to be able to run more and more tests, but at this point, it's like, well, it might just be better to just do it properly. Because
I know you said that you've got a lot of little micro, services essentially, or just small services that run in PHP 7 and they're running fine, and then it's just like one of your big legacy apps that still can't get on PHP 7 because of this. Yeah.
They are running it on our development servers, but badly, and we can't deploy it. And it's just the future's coming ever closer, ever quicker, and it's not sensible to lock yourself into a pattern where you've got to redo all this work every few years. And that's like a conservative estimate. PHP could change majorly at any time.
Yep.
The stuff in the engine, there is no backwards guarantees about that. None. That is implemented.
Well, especially a major release change bump, you're entitled to change it. They're able. No,
but even in patch versions, see, because none of the VM stuff is actually exported.
Ah, right. Yep.
So there's no backward.
That's just an implementation detail. It's nothing that's affecting user land.
So we're free to change that even on a patch version. So any time someone could come up with an optimization that means a bunch of work, and then someone could come up with another one, and it's like
that's kind of scary, actually.
Yeah, it's not sustainable. When PHP had been like it, PHP 5 was like it was more or less in its same form for a long time, like years and years and years. PHP 7 has changed between 7.0 and 7.1.
Yep. And I mean, performance is now a very sought after thing, now as well, which, is probably going to be causing a lot of these issues if, these changes happen.
Yeah, and it's not worth it, I don't think. I hate to feel like I'm letting people down, but because I know people are relying on it and that, and I'll fix bugs if they report them, and if they put in pull requests, I'll try to fix them, and if they put in pull requests, I'll merge them. But you've got to do. I use this for my job in the end, and I've got to do what I think is actually proper. And at this point, it is not reliant.
Where is the value? Can I weigh up? Actually spending the time on this.
If we just fix the code, then next time an upgrade for PHP comes out, we don't have to worry about any of this.
Yeah, the problem actually goes away. There is no. I haven't solved the problem. It's like you either solved the problem with a band-aid, or you've solved the problem full stop.
Yeah, it's not like fixing it will mean it gives us a bit longer. I mean, the problem goes away completely. We won't have to think about it at all, which is extremely valuable, and I think that's probably the right thing for everyone to do, even if they don't think it is.
I mean, what's your people at work think about that then? Is it something
that
they're happy with?
We've discussed it. The guy I work with on this stuff's on holiday at the moment, but we have discussed it, and I've said if it comes to that, should we do that? And he's like, yeah, that's what it comes to. We do that. I mean, we're not in any particular rush to deploy PHP 7 tomorrow.
Because how much of a boost is it for you as a product?
What you mean in terms of saving money?
Yeah, PHP 7 actually, like the speed increases and things like that. Like how much have you got? How much have you gained? Have you done benchmarks on it?
It would be too early to say yet. The stuff we've got is not like it's not the biggest resource eaters. The biggest resource eaters are the legacy stuff, so we can't say yet. But we're not struggling to run with the hardware we've got, and there is pressure on us to upgrade, but there's no like pressing urgent need to do it like tomorrow. So if it takes a bit longer and we fix the code and we end up with better code, then that's better than having to fixing it for now and then in any amount of time having to fix it all over again.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. It's one of those things. That's the hard thing, isn't it? It's where going down a different path and then thinking, going down a path and then realizing, okay, now I may have to backtrack now because it's served its time, its purpose, but now I need to think of it. Maybe the thing that I was trying to run away from is probably the better thing to actually go to.
Yeah, I mean, it's you got to sometimes say you were wrong, and I was probably wrong.
I don't know if you were wrong. I mean, at that time, it was working, and it solved the problem. I mean, I think the trouble is.
What I mean by I was wrong was that when it came to PHP 7, I should have just said, "Look, the engine's much more complicated now. We've got to focus on performance, which uopz is incompatible with, really."
Yeah, and completely stop the project there.
It's faster than doing the same sort of stuff in userland, but I should have left it there. I should have just said, "Look, let's leave it there. I'm not going to do it for PHP 7. We're all going to have to find different ways." And then a lot of people wouldn't have wasted time on it, especially us. But I know that I know that some other companies have wasted some time trying to get uopz to work, and that.
But you don't know until you try. I think that's
Well, I mean, it shouldn't really be like that, but because it was so new when I actually started making all the changes, it was a bit of a case of that. And now, I know in principle what's wrong with it, but the solutions to it are going to make it so horrible and so fragile, and I don't. It's not going to be the robust thing that it was for PHP 5, and I just don't want. I shouldn't have gone down this road. I should have just said, let's leave it there. But yeah, you make mistakes. Everyone.
It's always tough trying to please people though, and try. You feel bad for letting people down, but I wouldn't think. I think the trouble is that if it's such a hard problem to solve.
And it's just a recurring problem that's never going to go away.
But you're dealing with something that is fragile and not, and PHP core has not said it won't change. Like
it's a moving target.
Yeah,
it is a moving target, and it's difficult to keep up with that. PHP 5 was so mature that it had slowed down in its progression, and there was only so much more we could do. So when I took the decision to write it in the first place to replace RunKit, which was unstable, it made sense, but it didn't really make sense to upgrade it for PHP 7 because literally weeks after I'd done it, PHP 7 changed, and I had to do loads more stuff. And then more optimizations were done, and that restricted what I could do. And then I had to put patches into PHP source because they'd broken certain stuff that I could do before. And it was like, well, I probably should have realised then that actually this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. This is going to be too fragile. I don't want to. I don't want to be the guy who says no, you can't have that optimization because we need to do this in this.
Yeah.
In this really weird extension. I don't want to do that. No one wants to do that.
Yeah, because it shouldn't be that way, should it? Because, you shouldn't be dictating where the core goes on an extension. It should be the other way around always, really.
Yeah, but if you have got an extension that people use and you say, look, you've broken this, then they've got no choice to revert the change. And that's bad for everyone. It would be better by far if nobody had to do that. So that's probably what I'm going to do now.
All right then, Joe. Well, thank you so much, man, again for coming on. I really appreciate it. It's always good having a chat, and we'll definitely have to arrange maybe some other screencasts and stuff in the near future, because I think they say they went really well, and I think people enjoyed them. So, is there anything else you want to talk about before we end the show?
No, I'm good.
Awesome. All right then, audience. Well, it's been great speaking to you again this week, and we'll be back next week for another episode. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to 3 Devs and a Maybe. You can contact us at contact@3devsandamaybe.com or follow us on Twitter at 3 Devs and a Maybe.